We say it every year, but the competition in heavy metal and hard rock keeps getting more and more intense. Last year, we saw the greatest double live album in the history of hard rock and heavy metal. This year, we may be on the verge of the greatest single live album in the history of hard rock and heavy metal. But it's not a shoe-in to win Album of the Year because it's going up against four of the best heavy metal albums of all time. Who are these fantastic bands and what are these great albums? Find out next. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. If you're unfamiliar with our series, what we are doing on this channel is attempting to go back in time and recognizing the best heavy metal and hard rock music year by year from way back in the late 60s all the way to current day. Well, as you probably know, if you've been watching any of the series, the Grammys have been an absolute dumpster fire when it comes to hard rock and heavy metal. But this year is a very unique year. The Grammys have done something noteworthy that we need to call out moving forward. The year is 1979, and for the first time ever, the Grammys are going to recognize rock as a category. Not hard rock, not heavy metal, rock and roll. The very first year the Grammys are recognized as a category. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, wait a minute, it's 1979. Rock and roll's been around since the 50s, right? And yet here, the Grammys are finally recognizing it as its own category. Think about this for a second. In the 50s, we had the King, Elvis Presley. We had Buddy Holly. We had all sorts of Chubby Checker. Rock and roll was the biggest thing. In the 60s, we had the Beatles, who are known, universally as the greatest band that ever existed. We had the Rolling Stones. We've had the Who. We've had an entire decade of Led Zeppelin. We've had an entire decade of Black Sabbath. And finally, in 1979, the Grammys are finally recognizing rock and roll as a legitimate category. If you think that I've been hard on the Grammys, this is all you need to know. This is how bad they were at their jobs. So tonight, not only are we going to be going through the hard rock and heavy metal, but we're going to be going through the very first winners and nominees of the brand new rock category. I can't believe it. The Grammys have finally found rock and roll. Should be interesting. Well, let's get to it. And we're going to start off with Newcomer of the Year. (1979) is a bit of a transition year in the hard rock and heavy metal world. For those of you who've been watching, in 1978 we had Van Halen come out. In 1977 we had Motorhead and Riot come out, some of the biggest bands in the world. But in 1979 we're in a bit of a lull. Of course, we're a year removed before we see the huge explosion of heavy metal known as the new wave of British heavy metal. And there's a few signs in the water. Two of those stalwarts of the New Waba movement, Def Leppard and Iron Maiden, are going to put out EPs this year. And a couple of bands that are going to be notoriously part of the new wave of British heavy metal, Saxon and Samson, the band that was fronted by Bruce Dickinson, both put out albums in 1979. But they aren't very good yet. Saxon, very raw. Samson doesn't even really have Bruce Dickinson in the fold yet. So the winner this year goes to Accept, a German band that we're going to hear a lot about in the next decade. Udo Dirkschneider and the boys put out their self-titled album in 1979, and while it's not great, Probably one of the weakest of the Accept albums. Sometimes the competition just paves the way. There's not a lot of really talented bands coming out this year. And so Accept, even though it's not the greatest of their attempts, they're going to bring home the gold. Congratulations to Accept. Now, the Grammys that year picked their newcomer, Ricky Lee Jones, who had a song, Chucky's in Love. Now, I was around during this era, and I don't remember Ricky Lee Jones or this song, but it sounds awful. A band that got nominated in 1979 but did not win, Dire Straits. Now, that's a band worthy of getting Newcomer of the Year. So while Accept is going to win Newcomer of the Year in the heavy metal category, I got to give it to Mark Knopfler and the boys. Dire Straits is going to win Newcomer of the Year across the board. Ricky Lee Jones is probably another in a long line of the Grammys taking these kind of one-hit wonders and propping them up as Newcomer of the Year. Dire Straits is a very talented band that's going to have a big impact on music for decades to come. Congratulations to Accept and Dire Straits. Now let's move into Best Musical Performance. Our first nominee, The Thunder from Down Under, AC/DC, with Walk All Over You. This era of AC/DC is very special, and Angus Young is writing some of the catchiest riffs in the history of hard rock and heavy metal, and this is no exception. Walk All Over You starts off very slow, very methodical, and then kicks into one of the all-time catchiest jams of all time. Our first nominee, Walk All Over You by AC/DC. Our second nominee is a true instrumental in this category, Riot with Narita. Mark Reale, one of the most underrated guitarists in the history of hard rock and heavy metal, really gets to show his stuff on this one. Riot's kind of in that precipice of being a really good rock band, but becoming a really great metal band. This is one of those first indications that something very heavy was about to happen. This is an excellent, excellent song. It is our second nominee, Narita by Riot. Our third nominee, one of the kings of 70s heavy metal guitar, Ted Nugent, is back with the song Paralyzed. This is off the State of Shock album. It is the 5th studio album from Ted Nugent, and let's face it, he has been on a roll. All of the albums that Ted Nugent is touching are just classic hits, just waiting to happen. This is the first track. It opens up the album in the right way. Our third nominee, Ted Nugent with Paralyzed. Our fourth nominee is a song we've nominated before, Lights Out. This was nominated, of course, a couple years back from the studio album, but this time UFO is putting an end to the Michael Schenker era with a fantastic double live album, Strangers in the Night. And if you thought the studio version of Lights Out was good, wait till you hear the live version, the definitive version of this song, in my opinion. And because it's being shot in Chicago, the famous line, Lights Out, Chicago, is the twist on this song. Our fourth nominee, UFO with Lights Out Live. And finally, our fifth nominee, not a surprise, Edward Van Halen has arrived, and he does a solo/song by the name of Spanish Fly and DOA. DOA, my favorite song on Van Halen 2, and Spanish Fly is a little bit of a different type of solo in that it's all done on an acoustic guitar, and it is brilliant. Our fifth nominee, Van Halen with Spanish Fly, DOA. And the winner is Lights Out. Lights Out Chicago. This is a fantastic way for UFO to go out. Michael Schenker, one of the most fantastic guitarists of this entire decade, hit after hit after hit with UFO, but this is his masterpiece. The double live album, Strangers in the Night, is just a showcase for the talent of Michael Schenker. One of the greatest live albums of all time. And, you know, last year, Van Halen squeaked past the great live version of Ted Nugent and almost does it again. That acoustic guitar that he does on Spanish Fly is so great. And listen, don't sleep on that Mark Reale. There was so many good ones this year. Very difficult year to choose. Some great stuff going on. Now, back to what we were talking about at the first of the video. For the first time ever, the Grammys have a rock musical performance. And they choose Rockestra theme, Paul McCartney and Wings. Now, up until this point, we've been taking pop music and taking the male vocalists or this, musical performance. This is the first time they've actually done the rock category. And Paul McCartney and Wings bring home the gold. Paul McCartney, famous, of course, for his stint with the Beatles. But I don't know. Paul McCartney and Wings, not really ever really caught my eye with much there. When you start talking about Ted Nugent, when you start talking about Michael Schenker, when you start talking about Mark Reale, when you start talking about Eddie Van Halen, I think Paul McCartney and Wings is a poor choice on the Grammys' part. And none of the guitarists we just mentioned were even nominated for this category. So they're off to a very rocky start. So not only am I going to give Best Heavy Metal Musical Performance to Michael Schenker, I'm also going to say Best Musical Rock Performance also goes to Michael Schenker and UFO. Let's go to Best Vocal Performance. I warned you this might happen. Our first nominee, Judas Priest, Victim of Changes, the live version of Unleashed in the East. A couple of years ago, Judas Priest was nominated for Victim of Changes off the Sad Wings of Destiny album, but fell short as it ran into the buzzsaw known as Stargazer by Rainbow. But I said then, don't worry, this song might be back, and here it is. And make no mistake, this is the definitive version of the song. I see this song reacted to a lot. It's always a little bit weird because they pick. I've seen people reacting to the US Festival. I've seen them react to the Sad Wings of Destiny version. Not too many. I don't think I've seen one person react to this one, and it is the best. Rob Halford belts out a scream in the crescendo of this song on this recording. That's one of the all-time greats. I would say this right here might be the best Rob Halford vocal performance of all time. That's how good it is. 1979, Unleashed in the East. That is the edition of this song you want to hear, and it is our first nominee. Now, our second nominee is an old friend of the show, Fool in the Rain by Led Zeppelin. For those of you who have been watching from the beginning, Robert Plant at one point was dominating the Male Vocalist Award, winning 3 in a row. But he hasn't won one since. And unfortunately, this is his last chance to win one, because as we all know now, John Bonham, the drummer, dies in 1980, and Led Zeppelin calls it quits. So this is the last chance for Robert Plant to pick up that elusive 4th male vocalist title. Our second nominee, Led Zeppelin, Fool in the Rain. Every year we have this category, And every year, Freddie Mercury gets in here. And this year, he is in for Love of My Life, the live version. The number of great live albums that are coming out in 1978 and 1979 is jaw-dropping. And here, Queen gets in on the act. There's a lot of great songs. Freddie Mercury, it's so amazing. Sometimes, these live albums, these singers he doesn't even sound like he's live. His voice sounds right out of the studio. Really great. The reason I picked this song is I love the fact that he says, we're going to do a duet. And it's him and the crowd singing this song. Love it. Our third nominee, Love of My Life by Queen, live. Now, we talked about Halford's definitive vocal performance. We may have another one on our hands. Our fourth nominee, the Scorpions, with Can't Get Enough. If you have been watching the program, you know how much I think of Klaus Mein's voice. And this could be his signature vocal performance. Oh boy, Can't Get Enough is one of the all-time great. The power that Klaus Mein has in this song is awe-inspiring. Our fourth nominee, Can't Get Enough by the Scorpions. And our fifth and final nominee, Whitesnakes, with the song Love Hunter. David Coverdale has also won this category in the past, one of the all-time great singers. Of course, you know him from Deep Purple. He won this category way back when he did a version of the song Mistreated. Well, he's back with his own band now. Whitesnake's just getting started, but I have a feeling David Coverdale is going to be someone we're going to be seeing a lot of in the coming years. Our fifth nominee, Whitesnake, with the song Love Hunter. And the winner is you probably guessed it even a couple of years ago. Judas Priest, Victim of Changes, the live version. Sorry, Robert Plant, there is no fourth vocalist of the year. And Klaus Mein, any other year, you'd have been a shoo-in. But this is Rob Halford's party. And if you remember back last year, Dio was going for 3 in a row. He was the 2-time defending champion. Now Rob Halford has picked up 2 straight titles. So Halford and Dio are really, just dominating this category right now, and well-deserved. Halford, one of the greatest vocalists in the history of heavy metal, and he's just getting warmed up. Now, the Grammys that year, it's very interesting. We've talked about sometimes the Grammys have male vocalists that sing okay. There's just nothing special about their voice, but they're fair. This year, the Grammys nominate one of the worst singers I have ever heard in my life, Bob Dylan. Folks, Bob Dylan can't even enunciate. Bob Dylan, he goes, I'm like a rolling stone. I can't even understand a word he says. He slurs. I can't even do justice as to how bad of a singer he is. How in the world can the Grammys, for a rock performance, pick Bob Dylan? Ugh. Terrible. Sometimes they have a singer on there that's like, well, it's a good song, but I don't know, his singing's all that great. Bob Dylan. First of all, I don't get Bob Dylan, so there's a little bit of prejudice here. But secondly, I can't listen to this dude. This dude has zero voice and zero charisma. I'm not sure. I think we've said this before. The only thing that explains the popularity of Bob Dylan is drugs. It's got to be. So, I'm sorry. Rob Halford is all of our nominees are better than Bob Dylan. I can't sing a note. I'm better than Bob Dylan. That's how low of an opinion I have of Bob Dylan. So not only does Rob Halford win heavy metal male vocalist of the year, he's going to win male vocalist in the rock category as well. Now for female performer, we're going to award this one to Pat Benatar for the song Heartbreaker. I know right now you're in shock. You're like, did the metal dude just give a singing award to a female other than Ann Wilson? I did. Because Ann Wilson didn't put out an album this year. But that don't sell Pat Benatar short. Because even if Ann Wilson would have been in the field this year, Pat Benatar's about to go on a run where she's going to give Ann Wilson all she wants. Pat Benatar, one of the powerhouse singers in the hard rock movement. She's just getting started. Once again, talking about a newcomer of the year. What about Pat Benatar? This chick has a great voice. Now, the Grammys that year, and again, they just made this new rock category, and we got old man Bob Dylan. And for the female vocalists, they have Donna Sumner for Hot Stuff. I really like Donna Sumner. She, again, makes my disco heart go thump, thump, thump. But I do have a question. Is Donna Sumner rock? Seems like disco would be more in the pop category. And in the pop category, they go with Dionne Warwick. So there's still a pop category. We're just not talking about it now that they have the rock category. So I'll put Donna Sumner in that pop category because she's the queen of disco. And Hot Stuff's a great song. But rock? I think that is another very sus call. So you don't recognize rock for 20 years. And now you're putting people in the category that aren't really rock because you didn't really recognize it to begin with. You see, it's the fatal flaw of the Grammys is they don't believe in rock. They've never liked rock. So they realize after 20 some odd years of rock, they really need a category. So they put a bunch of pop stars in there. Billy Joel, by the way, won the best pop male performance that year. Billy Joel's heavier than Bob Dylan. So I don't know what they're doing. One other funny note. Billy Joel beats out Rod Stewart, who has, again, My Young Disco Life. If you want my body and you think I'm sexy, come on, baby, let me know. Rod Stewart should have won this thing. Just because I think that is the ultimate, funniest song of all time. Love me some Rod the Bod. Anyway, Pat Benatar, best female heavy metal, hard rock, best female voice in rock, wins both categories, as does Halford on the male side. All right, speaking of hard rock, let's go to best hard rock song of the year. Our first nominee, Led Zeppelin with All My Love. It's been a while since Led Zeppelin competed in this category. They've been kind of on a much, been slacking off a little bit. Let's just be honest. They were really pumping out the albums. They put 2 albums out in 1969. Now it's like every couple of years they put an album, but this is really a good one. And again, unfortunately, it is their swan song as John Bonham leaves us just a few months after this. But what a way to go out. All My Love, Led Zeppelin, our first nominee. Our second nominee is a person that we saw in the band Montrose before, but this is the first time we've recognized him as a solo artist. The great Sammy Hagar with The Planets on Fire. Sammy's been kind of knocking on that door as a solo artist for a couple of years, but he just kicks it in with this one. A very underrated song. Really heavy, great guitar riffs, and of course, Sammy's great voice. Our second nominee, This Planet's on Fire by Sammy Hagar. Now, a couple of years, I left you on a bit of a cliffhanger where we were talking about how Kiss had been through this great stretch, but things were about to change. Well, since then, Kiss put out, a series of solo albums. They put out a second live album, not nearly with the energy of the first one. And now they come back with this song, our third nominee, I Was Made for Loving You by Kiss. This is, many people consider, Kiss trying to mix hard rock and heavy metal with disco. There's definitely a disco backbeat in here. Kiss is starting to fall apart a little bit, but this song is ridiculously catchy and ends up being one of their biggest hits. So I put it in here as our third nominee, Kiss with I Was Made for Loving You. Another newcomer to the hard rock category, Triumph with Lay It on the Line, is our fourth nominee. Triumph is a really good band coming out of Canada. Great vocals, great guitar. They are going to start a run of several good albums in a row, but I don't know that they ever get any better than right here with our fourth nominee, Lay It on the Line by Triumph. And the new kids on the block, Van Halen, they're the defending champions. They come back with a second album and the song, Somebody Get Me a Doctor. Van Halen is cooking right now. Their first album wins all sorts of awards last year. They come back strong with the second one. Many good songs that you could put in here. Very similar to the first album, where they have hit after hit after hit. But we're going with Somebody Get Me a Doctor. And you know what? We talk and talk and talk about the great Edward Van Halen. But David Lee Roth, he's knocking it out of the park too. What a great frontman for this band. He sings this song very, very well. And this is, again, we talked about DOA in the Best Musical category. This song is also very similar to that in that it's one of the heavier songs on this album. Really dig it. And the winner is Somebody Get Me a Doctor. Somebody get me a shot. The hard rock world was not ready for Van Halen. 2 years in a row, Hard Rock Song of the Year, and they're just getting started. I have a feeling Van Halen is going to be a very tough out in the coming years in this category. Let's go to the Heavy Metal Song of the Year. What a loaded card. Our first nominee, AC/DC, with Touch Too Much. We talk a lot about the great catchy riffs of Angus Young, but we don't give near enough credit to the clever lyrics of Bon Scott. And Touch Too Much is one of those songs where, oh my goodness, that's signature Bon Scott right there. Just the twists, the turns, all of the double entendres, everything that made Bon Scott one of the great lyricists and great singers of our time. Unfortunately, very similar to what we just got through talking about with Led Zeppelin, this is going to be the last of the Bon Scott era AC/DC albums, as Bon Scott unfortunately is going to pass in 1980. But boy, what an album to go out on. Our first nominee, AC/DC, Touch Too Much. Now, if you're with us last episode, we talked about the controversy that is Judas Priest, who put out Killing Machine in 1978, had some trouble here in the States, put out Hell Bent for Leather in 1979. But they did put an additional song on the album in 1979. So this song, legitimate 1979 Green Manalishi. But just to avoid all controversy, we're going to go with the live version of it. Because once again, Green Manalishi is one of the staples of a Judas Priest show. The sing-along on this is to die for. Our second nominee, Judas Priest, Green Manalishi, Live. Our third nominee, we talked about them a couple episodes back as our newcomer of the year. Motorhead is back. Oh boy. Overkill, one of the best songs in the Motorhead collection. I love this song. It's kind of a very unique song, unless in that it kind of has three endings. Like you think it's going to end, and then it kicks back in, and then you think, well, okay, for sure it's going to end now, but it kicks back in again before it finally goes. Boy, Motorhead, way ahead of their time. This is fast, it's heavy, great drums on this by Filthy Phil. Motorhead, Overkill, our third nominee. Now, as you guys know, if you listened to the show last week, Rainbow has departed ways with their original lead singer, Ryan James Dio. And in his place comes Graham Bonnet. And they're going to put out one of the greatest songs in the entire Rainbow collection, Lost in Hollywood, our fourth nominee. Look, Graham Bonnet does not have the voice of Ryan James Dio, and quite frankly never really found his niche with Rainbow. But this song in particular is amazing. And I love it because it builds. I love a song that builds and builds to this big crescendo, and Graham Bonnet knocks it out of the park. A sleeper pick here. Rainbow, Lost in Hollywood. And finally, our fifth and final nominee, the Scorpions, with one of my all-time favorite Scorpion songs, You're Just Another Piece of Meat. What a great song. Fast. Again, very similar to what AC/DC is doing in that there's a lot of double entendre and a lot of going back and forth. Scorpions are really chugging along right now. And if you remember back when we were talking about best musical performance, we talked about the fact that Michael Schenker actually shows up with the Scorpions again and plays on this number. So not only does Michael Schenker get nominated for the work that they're doing on the live album for UFO, he's part of the band getting the nomination for the Scorpions for this particular song, Just Another Piece of Meat. And the winner is Overkill by Motorhead. You see the boys up on the background here. This is the original Motorhead, the three-piece. Filthy Phil on drums. We talked about how great his playing is on this song. Let's not sleep on Fast Eddie Clarke, the lead guitarist. And of course, the leader of this motley crew, Lemmy. This Motorhead just came out of nowhere, folks. This is hard, this is heavy, this is fast, this is gruff. I remember a line when I first heard about Motorhead. They said, this is the kind of music that will, kill the fungus under your bed. This is really heavy for its time. Congratulations, Motorhead with Overkill. Really one of the best songs in the entire Motorhead collection. Now, the song of the year that year goes to the Doobie Brothers. What a Fool Believes. This is really Michael McDonald's now really taken over the band. He's the singer, of course, on this song. I'm a big fan of the Doobie Brothers, but I really felt that they'd kind of had their peak and were kind of going down the other side. Now, a lot of people disagreed with me on this one. This was a big hit for the Doobie Brothers, but if I'm gonna pull out the Doobie Brothers, I'm gonna go a little bit earlier in their collection. Some of their earlier stuff is, to me, a lot better than this. This is a little bit, getting into a little bit too much top 40 for me. Michael McDonald has a really great voice. I do like his voice, but I don't really like the songs that the Doobie Brothers do with him. Again, kind of like the band a couple years earlier. Anyway, so not only am I going to give Motorhead Song of the Year in the metal, I'm also going to give him Best Rock Song of the Year as well. But enough beating around the bush. Let's get to Album of the Year. I'm not going to lie. To me, this is the toughest selection I've ever had to make as far as Album of the Year. Oh, maybe I jostle between one or two albums. There's always, sometimes there's 3 great albums. This year, all 5 of these albums are absolute monsters. And all 5 of them, any one of them could win this thing on any given day. Having to choose one is very painful, but we're going to have to do it. Let's go through these 5 great albums. Our first nominee, Highway to Hell by AC/DC. Again, sadly, Bon Scott's farewell to us comes in the form of a masterpiece. We talk about this all the time. There are such things as perfect albums. An album from start to finish is so good. You start off with Highway to Hell. Now, let's be honest. We've all probably heard Highway to Hell, a million times by now. But what a great song. We talked about Walk All Over You. We talk about Touch Too Much. Girls Got Rhythm, Beating Around the Bush. Shot Down in Flames has one of the great lines. Hey baby, what's the going price? She told me to go to hell. One of the great lines. Bon Scott was full of some of the great ones. If You Want Blood, Night Prowler, this thing is 100%. I think it's the best AC/DC album of all time. And again, that's saying a lot. Let There Be Rock won Album of the Year just a couple of years ago. We all know what's coming down the pike with Back in Black. That this might be their absolute best. Phenomenal. Our first nominee, AC/DC, Highway to Hell. But it's going up against, in my humble opinion, the best single disc live album of all time. Judas Priest's Unleashed in the East. Victim of Changes, the definitive version of this song. Exciter, the definitive version of this song. The list goes on and on. Tyrant, Genocide, such great versions of those songs on here. The scream that Rob Halford unleashes on Victim of Changes is unworldly. This is top to bottom. Every song on here is great. The sing-along on Green Manalishi, top notch. I love the fact that you take the Judas Priest collection, you put it into a live album, and you just knock it out of the park. Because Judas Priest, the thing that made these live albums so great is the production sometimes on these studio albums was a little bit shaky. If you go back to Sad Wings of Destiny, it is a brilliant album, but the production's a little dodgy. Roger Glover comes in and does a great job, I thought, with Sin After Sin, but Stained Class and, Killing Machine kind of had that 70s productions. Then this thing just explodes. Not only is it a fantastic live album, it's got all that energy, all that aggression, but tremendous production on this one. Our second nominee, Unleashed in the East by Judas Priest. Our third nominee, we talked about them for Song of the Year. Overkill by Motorhead. Motorhead actually puts out 2 albums this year, Overkill and Bomber. But let's face it, Overkill is the best. And although Ace of Spades is going to come out shortly and is considered by many to be their best, I'm going to put a little flag in the sand right here. I think Overkill is the absolute best Motorhead album of all time. Well, first of all, you got Overkill, the title track, which is great. But you have so many good songs on here. No Class, one of my favorite songs. Capricorn, Stay Clean, Metropolis. again, the list goes on and on because every song on here is excellent. And again, when Motorhead hits, they sound like nothing that's come before them. This is the fastest, heaviest thing going in 1979, and it's our third nominee, Overkill by Motorhead. I feel like the Scorpions, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. But here, the Scorpions have been building and building. We talked about Virgin Killer, In Trance, then Virgin Killer, then Taken by Force. Every album gets better and better. Taken by Force, a perfect album. But here is my absolute favorite Scorpions album of all time, Love Drive. Now, the interesting part of this is that this is part Michael Schenker and part new guitarist Matthias Jabs. It seems like there's a lot of bands in transition. We talked about Dio leaving Rainbow with Graham Bonnet. We talked about Ozzy leaving Sabbath, being replaced by Dio. There's a lot of people coming and going here. And here we have Uli John Roth leaving the Scorpions. And again, Michael Schenker comes into the band for a little bit, records 4 or 5 songs, but this becomes now the Matthias Jabs era. And as much as I like Uli John Roth, and the Matthias Jabs, this is the era of the Scorpions that I love the most. And this is the best album ever. Another piece of meat. Can't get enough. Loving You Sunday Morning, Holiday, Coast to Coast. This thing, just Love Drive, the title track, another one that was done by Michael Schenker. This is a great, great Scorpions album. It's our 4th nominee. And the defending champs are in the house. Van Halen comes in with their second album titled Van Halen 2. Well, they're not the most original title, but you get the point. Whew. Another great, sensational album by Van Halen. We talk about the song Spanish Fly DOA. We've talked about Somebody Get Me a Doctor, Lighten Up the Sky. They do a couple of covers. Van Halen really does a lot of covers in these, in these first couple of albums. David Lee Roth is just sounding like a tiger prowling around on the stage. Eddie Van Halen is doing things we've never heard. Don't sleep on the harmonies and the bass of Michael Anthony or the great drumming of Alex Van Halen. I think Alex Van Halen kind of gets ignored because his brother revolutionized guitars, but what a great drummer. And again, it's just hit after hit. Oddly enough, when this album came out, it wasn't my favorite album. This is an album that, in comparison to the great Van Halen 1, has kind of a toned down, a little slower, a little darker. The production's not as bright. And I think when I first got this album, I was a little bit like, wait a minute, this isn't Van Halen 1. But over the years, if you would have asked me back in the early 80s of the first 4 of the great Van Halen classics, I'd have made this 4th. Now it's knocking on the door to number 1. It's really grown on me over the years. Love, love, love this album. And it is our 5th and final nominee, Van Halen, with Van Halen 2. Folks, this choice is, you can't get a tougher choice than this. And the winner is Hey Mama, Look at Me. I'm on my way to the promised land. AC/DC, Highway to Hell. I almost changed my mind and swerved at the last minute. That Judas Priest live album, so good. Love Drive. How can you not give the award to Love Drive? But at the end of the day, this AC/DC album has to be the winner. And it's their second album of the year. A couple albums back, of course, they won for Let There Be Rock. So AC/DC and Bon Scott take home the title for the second time in the 70s. Unfortunately, like I said, it'll be the last of the Bon Scott albums. Rest in peace, Bon. I miss that glimmer in your eye and that wry smile when you're, turning a phrase. Again, one of the best lyricists of all time. Some of the great songs of our time. And really, Angus and Malcolm just cranking out the riffs at this point. What a sensational band. What a sensational era of music. Congratulations, Album of the Year, AC/DC, Highway to Hell. Now, the Grammys that year went with Billy Joel and 52nd Street. And if I was to say my favorite Billy Joel album, it would be 52nd Street. Pretty good album. But not against this stacked card. Honestly, we made a joke last time, because Billy Joel went to Russia and got his panties in a twist about how much more the Russian fans, were reacting and responding to metal than to his music. But it is true. There is some truth to all of this. And that Billy Joel was good. But he wasn't as good as Van Halen. He wasn't as good as AC/DC. He wasn't as good as the Scorpions. These bands are in their prime right now, and they're just pumping out the best music in the land. Heavy metal is about to explode. 1980 is upon us. The new wave of British heavy metal. Heavy metal is going to go into the stratosphere, folks. But there's a reason why. Because even though this was considered dinosaur rock, heavy metal was supposed to be dead, disco is supposed to be the new king, bands like AC/DC and Judas Priest and the Scorpions and Rainbow and Van Halen were putting out such great music. It was going to lead to this explosion. You couldn't ignore it any longer. And boy, let me tell you, 1980 is the all-time greatest year in the history of hard rock and heavy metal. It's right on the cusp. But it's because of these bands. These bands, when nobody wanted to listen to heavy metal, when no one was listening to hard rock, these great artists were putting out the best music that the world had ever heard, and they couldn't ignore it any longer. Billy Joel's good. AC/DC's better. AC/DC wins Hard Rock Heavy Metal Album of the Year, wins Rock Album of the Year, hell, wins the entire Album of the Year. AC/DC, it's a clean sweep. You can't touch the great hard rock and metal that's going on right now. You can't. Congratulations, AC/DC. And folks, that's a wrap on the 70s. What a decade. When you think about where we came from in the early 70s with the British Big Three of Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin. Now we've got these young bands, AC/DC, Van Halen. We got that second wave of metal with the Scorpions and Judas Priest. Man, what a time to be alive. What a great era of music. And like I say, we're about to unveil the curtain on 1980, and things are going to get even crazier, even wilder, even better. Unbelievable stuff coming down the pike. And you don't want to miss all the great stuff coming down the pike, because we are going to be talking about the 80s soon, the greatest era of heavy metal music of all time. So this is a good time to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, get notified to new content. We're going to be putting out new specials every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So come out and check us out. In the meantime, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.